Hello viewers of Afrin 1. Welcome to a new episode of our Political Views program. My guest today is Nadine Maenza, who's a speaker, writer and policy expert. Our discussion will be about the religious tolerance that existed in Afrin before the Turkish occupation. How did this tolerance turn into an ethnic and religious war against the Kurds? Incidentally, Nadine Maenza is the founding executive director of Patriot Voices, as well as she is the chairman of Hardwired Global, an organization that works to stop religious oppression around the world. She has advised several major organizations on faith engagement, policy development, and strategic partnerships. She was appointed by former US President Donald Trump to the International Religious Freedom Committee in May 2018 and elected vice chair in June 2019. Welcome, Ms. Maenza, to our Political Views program.
Surreal being in Raqqa, Syria today. This used to be a church that was bombed by ISIS, and Raqqa is the former headquarters for the ISIS Caliphate. But now it's the headquarters for the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, a government that has the best religious freedom conditions in the Middle East and has the best conditions for women. So it's really interesting that this used to be such a horrible place and now it's being transformed into this refuge for religious minorities.
Let's start with your visit to the Kurdish regions in northern Syria. Tell us about your reason for visiting and your opinion of what you saw.
Sure. So I just returned from spending over a month in northeast Syria, and I really wanted to understand the conditions there, especially those for different religious and ethnic components. I wanted to understand, too, how this government, the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, set up self-governance from the bottom up that preserves religious freedom and gender equality, something that we're not seeing in other parts of the Middle East. So I was able to spend time in both the Kurdish majority areas, the further northern areas, but then also the areas that were added to the Autonomous Administration later, some of the Arab areas after the defeat of ISIS, and kind of understand even how the religious tolerance and how conditions are in those areas as well.
All right. Now, what's the extent of percentage of religious tolerance in northern Syria?
Right. Well, I found religious tolerance and religious freedom to be excellent in all of northeast Syria. I had first learned actually about the conditions under the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria when I first joined the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which I was appointed, as you mentioned, in May by President Trump of 2018. And then I was recently reappointed over the summer. And so, the commission started following it before I even joined the commission. And so when I first heard about it, I was able to meet some of their leaders that came to Washington and visited. And we started paying close attention as we saw what was happening with Turkey. And of course, once Turkey invaded, we of course took a strong stand because we knew that it was impacting religious freedom, because the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is very focused on religious freedom. We have one mandate, and that's to assess religious freedom conditions abroad and make recommendations. So the commission has stepped into this space because of the remarkable religious freedom conditions in the Middle East. And what I found is Syriac Assyrians, Armenians, Chaldeans, and even Kurdish Christian converts were able to practice their faith, something that you don't see anywhere else in the Middle East. Yazidis, of course, were welcome and protected. And I know in Afrin in particular, as well as Kobani, in those areas, there's been a large amount of Kurdish converts to Christianity. And I know, they had complete freedom of religion in Afrin before Turkey invaded. And of course, we know now that has changed.
Mrs. Maenza, you know that the northern regions of Syria are predominantly Kurdish areas. And before the Turkish occupation of Afrin, religious coexistence was ideal in this region. But after the Turkish occupation of Afrin in the northwest and the cities of Ras Al Ain and Tal Abyad in the northeast, killings and kidnappings increased on the basis of religious identity. Why, in your opinion, do not Turkey and the Syrian factions loyal to Turkey be deterred from carrying out these acts against the Kurds?
Right. So you're right. The areas occupied by Turkey, do have the opposite conditions that we've seen in the rest of northeast Syria, and perhaps Afrin the worst because it's been occupied the longest by these Turkish-backed Islamist groups. I was told Afrin was the crown jewel of Syria, untouched by the civil war. Hearing about the atrocities that are being committed there is just heartbreaking, especially against religious and ethnic minority components like Yazidis, Christians, Kurds. So even this morning, I was looking through some of the documents, that we have at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom looked at that document all of these conditions. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, Genocide Watch. In fact, I was just looking at here, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. She said of those cities you mentioned, Afrin, Serkani, Tel Abyad, an alarming pattern of grave violations have been documented in these areas in recent months, such as increased killings, kidnappings, and unlawful transfer of people, as well as seizures of land and properties. Now, this just came out in September of this year. So here the UN High Commissioner is once again documenting and announcing these horrible conditions in Afrin and these other, in Tel Abyad and Serkani and the other areas that Turkey has occupied. But yet just last week during a congressional hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, ranking Republican Mike McCall asked Joel Rayburn, the special envoy for Syria, about these atrocities. In fact, he said my name and said he had learned about them from me. And Joel Rayburn's response was that so Mike McCall asked what he does with the information he learns, the atrocities being committed in these areas. And he said that he, quote, raises it with his Turkish counterparts. So I was disappointed that it wasn't a stronger response, that it wasn't, we condemn these atrocities, because the atrocities are documented. This isn't rumor. This isn't hearsay. This isn't what he said, she said. These are documented by the United Nations, all these other independent organizations, that these atrocities are happening against Christians, against Yazidis, against Kurdish women. And yet people, are looking away and kind of ignoring them. And so, your question about why, right? No one deters Turkey because everyone is afraid to anger Erdogan. There's just a sense that no good will come from that. And somehow Turkey is seen as the answer for Syria because of their support of the Syrian opposition coalition. There was a time that the Turkish-backed Syrian opposition coalition seemed like it might have been the answer to the Assad regime. And no doubt this has been a difficult situation, trying to find an answer to the quagmire that has been Syria. But lately they have shown themselves to be a different kind of terrible to Assad, but nevertheless one that threatens religious freedom in Syria. And just in November, Nasser al-Harari, the president of the Syrian coalition, opposition coalition, went to a friend when I was in Kobani. I was talking about religious freedom in all the different cities in Northeast Syria, and the president of the Syrian opposition coalition went to Afrin, and he announced that the religious freedom conditions there were terrific, especially mentioning the Yazidis.
In your opinion, will Joe Biden be on his promises, one of which he said that he will punish Turkish President Erdogan for his army's occupation of areas of Syria and his purchase of S-400 missiles?
Well, I do, it's clear with Congress having just passed sanctions against Turkey because of the S-400s, it's clear that Congress is ready to step up against Turkey for these many violations in Northeast Syria, but also in purchasing these Russian weapons. So I think the tide is turning in Washington, period. I think we've seen it in this administration. I think we're going to see it in the next administration. And so the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, has made some recommendations in both April of this last year and in the summer. They include things like the U.S. government should pressure Turkey to withdraw from Syria. They should ask the U.S. government the U.S. government should lift sanctions on just the northeast part of Syria. So, they don't need nation building. What they need is an ability to be able to really fund their own government, and they can do that with the oil they have, with the soil they have. And if the U.S. government really wants to clamp down on the Assad regime, lifting sanctions on this part of the country would be especially hurtful to Assad. And we've also the U.S. Commission has recommended that the autonomous administration in Northeast Syria be included in a political solution per UN Resolution 2254. I'm hopeful that this next administration looks at the conditions on the ground, as I had mentioned, and supports those who have a commitment to our values. So people that see that I'm supporting the autonomous administration, make it very clear it's a condition-based support. I started supporting them before I even knew them because of the conditions that were so remarkable on the ground. And so, they've done something that I think the U.S. needs to take a look at, and really the international community. How do we really beat extremism? How do we beat this ideology that's coming from ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and a lot of other groups in the region? And we do that with a couple of things. I think it's important to note that, governance is a key part. Being able to set up governance that gives people a say in their own governance. You don't see that in much of the region. And here, people have a say in their governance. They also have security because the Syrian Democratic Forces are a really powerful security force. And then, they also have an ideology that fights the extremist ideology. So they have these two things. They have governance, they have security, and they have an ideology. And so they're not, so I really think that what the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria has done has been something that we should be praising, and we should be looking closely, engage directly with the government and talk about those things. But I think it's important to acknowledge that in this very complicated situation, you have someone that's doing something right. And we need to be able to support them and see how we can spread the freedoms that they give the people of North and East Syria. It's so disappointing to see what has happened in Afrin. We talked about earlier about the Kurdish converts to Christianity and all through Northeast Syria. And Afrin, just recently, several months ago, Christians were arrested for apostasy that had converted to Christianity decades ago. And so you're seeing these rights that are so freely enjoyed in Northeast Syria being clamped down, especially on Afrin. And so I think it's time for the international community to speak up about this. I'm amazed and surprised that the United Nations was willing to do so. But I do think that it's time that we deal with the reality on the ground, not just what we want on paper, but the reality on the ground, and a way forward where people can enjoy freedom again, and where Afrin can be free and be the crown jewel that it once was for Syria.
Before I finish, I would like you to tell us how America planned to engage in anti-Turkey. Are there signs or serious steps for such a decision?
I definitely think that the momentum is moving against Turkey. I do believe that people are seeing Turkey as being hostile in lots of places around the world. And I think Turkey knows that. I think they're making changes in their lobbying. I think most people don't understand that Turkey spends millions of dollars a month lobbying on their behalf in Washington. They fund a lot of think tanks, even ones that do some pretty good work on Christian issues and other issues. And so they've been able to have a seat at the table and convince people to look away at some of the things that are happening. But I think it's gotten to the point where that's going to be hard any longer. So, and I'm hopeful for the people of Turkey that Erdogan will be stopped, because I think the Turkish people want freedom like everyone else in the world. And I do hope that at some point in time, they're allowed to also be able to speak, have freedom of speech again, and be able to give their political opinions. And, we do see a tightening on religious freedom in Turkey as well, which is very disturbing.
At the end of this episode, I would like to thank you very much, Mrs. Maenza, for taking your time to participate in this interview.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you also, dear viewers of Afrin 1, for watching. Goodbye.